been in 2 unions. I was in the Transport Workers Union, and I worked at a grocery store as well, which also had a grocery workers union, and they were so corrupt. The statement you made is just your perspective I can respect. That's coming from you, but it's like a blanket subjective perspective.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Last week, there was a conference held by one of the myriad right-wing social media things that are trying to duplicate Facebook and Twitter, but instead for right-wingers, presumably so that they can say slurs.
Yeah, like that's my thing. Like, you guys are, the right wing already dominates Facebook, and,
right.
and it is quite prevalent on all the other social media channels. I mean, if you look at the stats, people like Tucker Carlson and all the Fox News weirdos and Newsmax weirdos tend to be like the top 10 posts nearly every day on Facebook.
Yeah.
And that kind of reflects the demographics in terms of age and who uses Facebook. So, yeah, I mean, I know you were just joking, but honestly, that seems to be the real motivation here.
Oh, no, I mean, I wasn't joking. I think that is the primary motivation for these places like Parler and Gab and Minds.
They just want to be able to say slurs without consequence.
So Minds is one of these myriad right-wing social media things. They held a conference last weekend, and one of the panels was on media manipulation. And the panelists were a very strange group of people to be talking about this. You had Tulsi Gabbard, James O'Keefe.
Is that the Veritas project person?
It is.
Oh, what a creep.
Tim Pool and Ben Burgess. So very eclectic panel, this. And now, I'm not too interested in the main subject of the panel, but over the course of the conversation, unions come up. And the clear takeaway is, surprise, surprise, that Tim Pool does not understand unions. And unfortunately, though, even Ben Burgess, I think he kind of perpetuates a view of unions and unionism that is not the most helpful, even if his intentions are good. So what started the conversation is a dispute that Ben has with James O'Keefe. If you want to learn more about that, you can go watch the full panel. It is, if nothing else, entertaining. But Ben prefaces a discussion about the dispute with a defense of unions based around free speech, which I think is good. Because clearly the real free speech issue in this country is in the workplace, and it's not on Twitter.
Right.
But I think that listeners to the program will hear the issue that I've got when you come to it. But before we get to that, let's play the clip, this first clip from Ben.
We live in, despite being a wildly economically unequal society that's not made very democratic in many ways, we live in enough of a democracy that by and large people aren't worried about getting arrested. What are they worried about? They're worried about getting fired. Why are they worried about getting fired? Because the majority of Americans work in at-will employment situations in non-unionized workplaces where the boss can fire them at any time with no recourse and no due process. If you agree that this is a problem, right? And if you don't agree with that, I don't take you seriously on free speech. If you agree that that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, every member of every worker in every workplace in the United States should be a member of a union.
And so here, to this point, perfect. No notes. And he's exactly right. Like I said, the free speech folks, they want to stir all this up about woke mobs or whatever, and they want to pretend that the main free speech fight in this country is on Twitter, when it is clearly not. It's in the workplace. And if you don't support workers organizing, if you don't support unions, you cannot be a serious defender of free speech. I literally just had 2 or 3 conversations in the last week about people being interested in organizing, but being fearful of it for fear of professional repercussions, and people who have suffered professional repercussions for organizing. This is the free speech fight in this country. People are looking at their job situations and being unsatisfied with them, but being worried that they will lose their primary source of income if they speak out.
Right.
And yet you don't hear these people. You don't hear people like Tim Pool talk about the issue of at-will employment. You don't hear Jordan Peterson crying on YouTube about how people were fired at dozens of baristas at Starbucks have been fired over the course of this campaign. And Jordan Peterson has shed not a tear about it, even though he is constantly wailing, rocking himself to sleep back and forth in a fetal position because he's being suspended on Twitter, but he is shedding no tears for the baristas at Starbucks who are being fired, losing their primary source of income, losing the source of income that feeds their children, puts food on their table, pays for their rent, pays for their school, pays for their utilities and their groceries. He doesn't care about that, even though he is supposed to be the preeminent free speech warrior.
Right, and these are the exact same people who are going after education employees with this new Red Scare bullshit, searching for CRT or LGBTQ-friendly curriculum. And we've covered that on the show, but it's just worth repeating that these are the exact same people who cry about free speech on one day when it comes to themselves and, being able to say bigotry online.
Yeah.
But are the exact same people targeting educators who have the audacity to, believe in inclusion, or any kind of worker who dares speak up against unjust working conditions or attempts to organize.
Right.
It's total bullshit.
Right. But here's where we get to the minor issue that I have with what he said. Let's play this next clip, Adam.
If you agree that that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, every member of every worker in every workplace in the United States should be a member of a union, because when you're a member of a union, you actually have due process. You actually have an organization that will represent you when you're accused of wrongdoing, the same way that a lawyer will represent you when you are accused of wrongdoing in the criminal justice system.
Have you ever been in a union?
So people aren't going to be afraid of getting arbitrarily fired.
Now, I think Adam, you can probably see where I'm going with this. On the one hand, unfortunately, I think this is how many unions operate, and I think, Adam, you've got a really good experience that speaks to that.
Right. A
sort of service unionism. You pay your dues, you get a lawyer, or in this case, a union steward or a UNISERV director for education unions, and it is how many members experience their union, and it is even how some unions specifically want to pitch themselves, like insurance.
Right. You get in trouble, give us a call.
Yeah, but this is obfuscating and disempowering. This advocacy for unions, this definition of unionism is obfuscating and disempowering. It is obfuscating because even in situations where unions function in this way, in situations where unions function in an insurance or lawyer defense type model, it does not explain why they are able to provide the services that they do, which is the members, who are the union, right? You have an at-will job and bring in some outside third party with no basis in the workplace and try to have them represent you in disciplinary hearings. What's going to happen? You're going to get laughed out of the shop, right? Because there is no power there. There's no power there where you don't have a union. The only reason that you are able to have representation or service in this way comes from a union contract, which you will only get good articles and provisions in there from power on the shop floor, from having a strong membership base that the boss, or in the case of teachers, the politicians, are scared of. Right? It doesn't come. It's not the power does not come from having a public defense type UNISERV director or a union steward. That's not where the power comes from. The power comes from the membership, the strong majority of workers, or at least a strong minority or plurality of workers being in the same organization to such an extent that the boss or the politician is fearful of production being slowed or stopped by virtue of them not meeting their demands.
Right. I mean, and then the only way there's resources to even hire these lawyers or other advocates is by coming together and pooling the resources, right? Because individual workers, even if it were a situation where you could theoretically get your own attorney to represent you,
Right.
you know, which again is few and far between, considering at-will employment is the standard. But even in those situations, how many rank-and-file workers can afford to go out and get their own attorney every time something happens at work?
How many rank-and-file workers would even know where to go?
Right. And then how many attorneys out there can even do that kind of work and would be willing to do that kind of work? So, yeah, it does kind of... It mystifies the whole experience.
It mystifies it, and it's disempowering because it posits that the power is not in the hands of the members to shape their union or the conditions of their employment, but rather that the conditions of their employment and the way that their union functions are set, and they pay some third party, the union, to get the best out of those working conditions as possible. And that's disempowering because it's because if you think that the power is not in your hands, in your coworkers' hands, you know, I mean, it's just it's disempowering, and it's not true. So, you know, I mean, I understand Ben has the heart's in the right place, but I do think it's worth pointing that out that's not where the power comes from, and that is not where And that's not an empowering message to give to union members or potential union members who are dissatisfied with their working conditions and thinking about organizing. You know, the model that Ben is putting forward here is it's better than nothing, but you know.
Yeah, and
obfuscating and disempowering.
Yeah, and we had Rai had a comment in the chat that that Ben probably wouldn't disagree with anything we're saying, and he was tailoring this argument for his audience, full of right-wing libertarian legal nerds. Which absolutely appreciate those comments because you're exactly right. I think that's what he was trying to do, but I think this is an example of sometimes the way we talk about unions. And ways unions talk about themselves that does not get at the heart of the matter and can really, in my experience, what I saw is that it facilitated this sort of apathy and service model and third-partying kind of behavior. Because when the union would talk about themselves in that way, well, then the members started to talk about it in that way. And
they start believing that's how it operates.
Right. And so that's where you have a situation where, you can have the majority of your membership view it as an insurance policy or something akin to an insurance policy. And that's not healthy for organizing, and that's not healthy for the power dynamics in your workplace. Because at a certain point...
ironically enough, if you have a majority of people legitimately viewing it as an insurance policy, it will be a less effective insurance policy.
Right, because, the extent to which the organization, the union, can actually help and defend and, win on behalf of individual members with individual grievances or terminations or what have you, is a reflection of that power. And the more you get down that road of treating it as a third-party insurance agency, the weaker the laws are going to be, the weaker your contracts are going to be, the weaker your mobilization is going to be when things don't turn out well.
Exactly. But of course, Ben hits much closer to the truth than Tim Pool does.
That probably wasn't hard.
Let's hear him talk about unions.
Oh, God, okay.
Have you ever been in a union? Just side question.
Yeah.
Which one? When?
I was in a couple. I've been in the...
Which one?
I've been in the UFCW and when I was working at Meyer in Michigan.
Noted and accepted. I didn't believe you. I couldn't imagine, based on what you'd said, that'd been true, because I've been in two unions. I was in the Transport Workers Union, and I worked at a grocery store as well, which also had a grocery workers union. And they were so corrupt that I was like, the statement you made is just like your perspective I can respect. That's coming from you, but it's like a blanket subjective perspective. But I don't want to...
Yeah, so, we can take bets in the chat about how many meetings Tim Pool went to at the two unions that he was a part of.
Yeah, and really, what corruption did you see?
Right.
Or is that just some shit you're saying?
Yeah.
Because I'm very skeptical that he witnessed anything corrupt. And that's not to say that corruption doesn't exist. It's out there, and we're very, honest on this show about that. We're not uncritical of labor institutions as institutions that are run by human beings that are fallible and are subject to the same kind of atrophy and corruptibility that happens in institutions that exist for a while. It's reality, but that's also a right-wing trope that folks just throw out there without any sort of context or without any actual backing behind it.
Right. And it's just totally at odds with the experience of the majority of union members, and he is using his experience, even if we stipulate that maybe his union was not as effective as it could be, and even if we stipulate that there maybe, who knows, maybe there was some corruption and some taking money and putting it in the officers' pockets. I don't know. I mean, these things happen. Who knows? But even in those situations, his workplace is going to be better than not having that union. And,
absolutely.
It's just, and so the idea that he's using that, even if we stipulate his experience, the idea that he's using that experience to say that, oh, I can't believe you would describe unions in this way as a positive thing. Not taking the issues that we did with it, but Tim was saying that the idea that you would paint unions as a positive thing is crazy to me because of my individual experience, instead of looking at literally any statistics that you can find on unions where union members make more money, they have better health care, they have retirement, which many non-union members do not. They have due process, like Ben was saying, even if it's not for exactly the reason that Ben was saying.
And
I mean, the list goes on and on.
That. He did not
exactly.
He did not actually address the issue being discussed by Ben, the free speech issue in the workplace, where you can be fired for any reason, for no reason, and your best hope of actually protecting against that is coming together with your coworkers, forming a union or strengthening your union to get those due process protections or just cause protections.
Right.
Tim doesn't mention that.
Right.
So where do you stand on at-will employment,
exactly.
Mr. Right-Winger?
And speaking of just cause and at-will employment, Joe Marshall says in the Facebook chat that a good attorney will not take cases like that because the attorney will explain that the employee, the at-will law.
Yes, so, I have been in meetings with union members and attorneys where essentially that was the meeting.
We are out of luck, buddy.
Right. We hey, you're a long-time dues-paying member. You want to see a lawyer? Okay, we'll get you into a lawyer. And we sit down, and the lawyer calmly explains, you don't have a case. Here's why you don't have a case.
Right.
Now, the challenge there is to say, what next? Unfortunately, the business union model typically is, well, okay, case closed. Go home, go away. See you later. Call us next time. Mm-hmm. But there is an alternative, which is to say, okay, we can't fix this in the courts. Is there another way?
Right.
Could we organize around this? Are there other workers who are experiencing the same issue that brought you to this office today? So that's the challenge, and that's the different ways of looking at it.
Right. And Martha and Mel Sutton in the chat say that, on that point, a union is only as strong as its weakest member. And, there's a lot of truth to that. You have a lot more engaged membership. The more engaged your membership is, the more strong it's going to be. So, Ben had a response to this, and they kind of have a back and forth. And let's play that back and forth between Tim and Ben.
Not at all subjective.
I don't want to have an argument about union.
However corrupt that union might have been that you were part of,
two of them.
If you had been accused of an infraction subject to disciplinary process, then you would have had the option of having them represent you in that process.
Wrong.
Okay.
Bro. So I don't want to get into an argument about unions other than to say, like, your subjective perspective.
It's not subjective. It's a fact that the effect of unions is to give you due process.
And sometimes they don't because humans are fallible. But I digress.
Okay, but you can say the same thing about having trial by jury, that like sometimes it's not a good due process.
So the issue is...
Still a due process.
And I think that Ben pushes back, I mean, exactly in exactly the same way I do, because Tim is, even if we stipulate that he had bad experiences, he is using that to negate the fact, to negate the total the idea of unions in totality and the effect that they do have on working people and the job security that they have. I mean, it's bizarre, the arguments that he's making.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, do you want to be able to lose your job for any reason or no reason without recourse?
Right.
Is that acceptable to you or not?
Right.
I mean, that's a question that people have to ask themselves. And there are situations where you're in a workplace and perhaps the union that is there is a little lackluster, in need of improvement. Maybe there are issues. Maybe you need a new president. Whatever the issue may be, that's something to wrestle with. But at the end of the day, do you think it's acceptable that your boss can fire you and take away your livelihood for no reason or any reason without you having any recourse?
Right. And the only way to, or the best way to make it a reality that your boss does not have that kind of power is to form a union. And you know, I had something and then I lost it. The bit about, shoot.
Well, sorry to get you off track there, but I mean, to me, that really is the bottom line question. And I feel like if you were to talk to workers on the street, workers in any industry, I don't think it's a big guess here to say that most workers would not be okay with that. Most workers aren't okay with that. Most workers have to be okay with it to a degree. They have to put up with it because that's the situation. That's the reality for most workers in this country. But I don't believe that most workers in this country want it to be that way.
Right, right.
Who would?
Right, yeah, exactly. And so, you know,
I think most people feel like, hey, if I come in and I really screw up and I've done something that deserves no more chances, then by all means do what you've got to do. Most people have enough common sense to recognize that, like, hey, I was late every day, then you caught me stealing. Okay, well, you know, do what you got to do. But most people also recognize that they come in, they try to do a good job. Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they're falsely accused. Sometimes they're in the wrong place at the wrong time, and things can happen. Sometimes they get a jerk supervisor who has it out for them. You know, those are just realities that people experience, you know, 5 days a week or more.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It is a bizarre... I mean, it is bizarre to dismiss the reality that unions, the reality of unions and the reality that union members experience because of his subjective experience. You know, he's talking. Oh, what I was going to say was that what Ben was saying is so important that it has actually been enshrined into law that unions have a duty to represent you fairly. And if unions do not represent you fairly, if you are disciplined on the job, and you know, this is an individual response, and you know, but it's more than people in non-union workplaces have. If you are disciplined on the job, and your union legitimately does not represent you fairly or at all, and you deserved representation, you can file a failure to represent against them, an unfair labor practice with the NLRB, and make them represent you. Like, it's illegal for them not to represent you.
Right. I think that is important to note. And what that means is not that they have a responsibility to do what you want them to do.
Right.
You know, here's an example from my experience. Every year, many non-tenured teachers would get the pink slip at the end of the school year. They're non-tenured. They're at will. The school district was fully within their rights to pink slip them on the last day of school, and it was up to them whether they wanted to hire them back or not. You know, every year that meant a lot of teachers who were very upset, justifiably so. And sometimes they would ask for, hey, I want a lawyer. I want to do this. I want to do that. And I had to explain, well, here's what the law says. Now, that's not to say we can't, lobby your principal to bring you back, or lobby the school board to bring you back, or doesn't mean there's nothing. But legally, no, you can't. We're not in a situation where we could file a lawsuit to get you back into your job as a non-tenured, at-will employee.
Right.
And so that's what it boils down to is, what is the situation? What could the union conceivably do? And did they actually, in good faith, execute that?
Right.
Sometimes in good faith, telling you don't have a case is the only thing they can do for you.
Right. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.